spacey and weird he was at that press conference last week. I mean, the mainstream media just wouldn't go there. And how about on the substance? The stuff that he said, well, if he wasn't lying, if he wasn't being dishonest, he's just horrifically mistaken.
It's sick. It's sick. Deciding in some states that you cannot bring water to people standing in line, waiting to vote. The Republican voters I know find this despicable. Republican voters.
His emotion is so strange and so out of place. I'll get specifically to how in the law itself, but he doubles down on this.
This makes Jim Crow look like Jim Eagle.
Jim Crow, those horrible laws in the 19th and 20th century that were discriminatory, that hurt and kept people of color down. This is nothing at all like that. But Joe is so pushing this fake narrative.
The new Georgia election law?
It's an atrocity. The idea, if you want any indication that it has nothing to do with fairness, nothing to do with decency, they passed a law saying you can't provide water for people standing in line while they're waiting to vote. You don't need anything else to know that this is nothing but punitive, designed to keep people from voting.
Number one, people online can be provided water. They can. Let's take a look at the law itself. Complicated language that they love to use, but this code section shall not be construed to prohibit a poll officer from distributing materials as required by law or from making available line to vote. All right. Now, earlier it does say that, look, outside groups can't be handing out water. But this is what it doesn't say. I want to go to the National Review. They have a great summary of this. Voters can still bring bottled water or other food or beverages with them to stand online to vote, as people often do when you're waiting online, say at Disney World or for concert tickets. Voters can still also, if they like, order food. The bill does not stop Domino's Pizza Man or the local hot dog cart or taco truck from doing business. The president's claim that you can't provide water for people about to vote, that is false. What you cannot do under the new Georgia law is deploy people in NRA T-shirts or MAGA hats to hand out free Koch brothers financed Federalist Society branded pizza to voters, all right? It's actually quite reasonable, and plenty of states have similar regulations on the books. Even Delaware, by the way, has arguably more restrictive rules regarding voter ID. And the White House, if you want to go to the White House, you need an identification, right? You can't just walk into the White House without ID. They're making all kinds of complaints that the Georgia rules are too onerous when it comes to absentee balloting and ID. And the media are going along with it all. And they're either dishonest, mistaken, but I suspect they know better and they are lying. First off, they protected Joe Biden. Again, that weird, spacey press conference, not a word of it really in the aftermath, both on the evening news last week and on the Sunday shows yesterday. And the conditions are such right now that this fairly straightforward law that they're lying about, 90 pages, it's a pain in the neck to read, but their rhetoric has taken off. So guess what?
In boycotts, including Major League Baseball potentially moving next year's All-Star game out of Georgia.
While a growing number of voting rights advocates are calling for a boycott of Georgia-based companies.
Do you believe that a boycott of Georgia is in order now that Brian Kemp has signed this law?
I absolutely do.
Absolutely. Yes, because it's taken hold in the left-leaning media and in the mainstream media. Let's check in with well-known debate thrower and Biden wannabe running mate Chris Wallace on yesterday's Fox News Sunday.
Well, wait a minute, Josh. In fact, it does say that it bans providing water or food to people at the polls. Why would that be? I mean, I know one of the arguments is, well, if people are at the polls, then an advocacy group can go and it's like you're near the election line and you're able to electioneer them. My gosh, people have been driving people to the polls of both parties for years. In a lot of African-American communities, the lines are longer because there are not enough polls in those communities. Are you really suggesting that it should be wrong to provide water or drinks to people waiting online to exercise their democratic franchise?
No, I'm not. What I'm suggesting is wrong is to suggest that the law does.
Well, that's what the law says, Josh. That's what the law says, Josh.
It doesn't.
And the law does provide for water for people online. You can order from Domino's. Electioneering is a real thing, as Chris actually mentioned. But why do they give them such license to be so dishonest? John Carl, same thing over there on filling in for Stephanopoulos.
But to be clear, I mean, the law in Georgia, if you are not a poll worker, to bring people food and water while they're waiting in line. And of course, we've seen very long lines in Georgia. And it's not just Georgia. There are efforts, Republican-led efforts, in 43 states to restrict voting in one way or another.
Restrict voting or try to keep the cheating to a minimum? And again, let's take one more look at that law. You can get water. It can come from the polling place. And outside a certain distance, you can order all the food you want. We just don't want outside groups coming up and, yeah, complicating things. I know that. I knew that as a kid. All right. Now, what's kind of affecting all of this? A very dishonest conversation about race. It's all over the place, but a lot of folks don't know how to talk about it because they're intimidated. And when they hear language like what you're about to hear, they shrink back and say, maybe if I am not a person of color, I have no role here.
We need to empower and uplift communities of color.
The Asian American community is a beautiful community.
To all the beautiful brown sisters out there with tattoos, with braids, you represent them well.
I was with the senator yesterday here in Las Vegas in a room full of beautiful black and brown people in East Las Vegas.
You have Kamala Harris, this bold, brilliant, beautiful black woman, HBCU graduate.
I wanted to uplift, encourage, and celebrate all of the beautiful black queens and kings that continue to inspire me and inspire the whole world.
You know, I guess that's all great, actually. The problem I have right now is that people who are not of color, when they come up in the public conversation, the language is diminishing, if not.
Pure white males trying to basically hold on to power with their life.
White privilege is how it happened. White privilege. We know why it happened.
Enlightened after what happened to Nicholas Sandmann a couple of years ago. Remember that? In front of the Lincoln Memorial. This kid, they try to cancel him because he stood and smiled with a MAGA hat on, as that guy was trying to cause all kinds of trouble. The racial conversation that's happening in America is a silly one to avoid a more serious one. Have you noticed? When it comes to crime, at least, it all depends on the color of the victim and the color of the perpetrator to figure out whether or not the media are going to give a damn. I'd like to talk for a moment about Muhammad Anwar. Have you heard about this story? A man originally from Pakistan who was driving for Uber Eats in Washington, D.C. His Honda Accord that he owned was carjacked by two teenage females, one 13, one 15. Absolutely horrible what happened. Here's
Certainly a tactic that people have suggested.
That was yesterday. I want to know more about what happened to Mr. Anwar. I want to know more about those two girls in that car. I want to know more. But instead, we'll just have a kind of a Democrat seminar and avoid an uncomfortable conversation about race so we can have a silly one. And that brings me back to Donald Trump. It's time for some Trump truth.
You are fake news.
Look, I thought he was great. I know lots of people had problems with him, but I liked him on substance and I liked him on style. And one thing I appreciated, he wasn't afraid of appearing politically incorrect. The appearance of being politically incorrect, that can inhibit people from speaking the truth or at least having a forthright conversation, people learning from each other. The fear of political incorrectness is such a waste of time. And I don't think we're ever going to have somebody who speaks so bluntly in the White House, unless he comes back in 2024, the way he said some basic truths like he did in one of the fall debates.
Why did you decide to do that, to end racial sensitivity training? And do you believe that there is systemic racism in this country, sir?
I ended it because it's racist. I ended it because a lot of people were complaining that they were asked to do things that were absolutely insane, that it was a radical revolution that was taking place in our military, in our schools, all over the place, and you know it, and so does everybody else. And he would know.
What is radical about racial sensitivity training, sir?
If you were a certain person, you had no status in life. It was sort of a reversal. And if you look at the people, we were paying people hundreds of thousands. They were teaching people to hate our country. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow that to happen.
Unfortunately, he's no longer president. So we've got to pick up the fight. People of all races who are not racist, who don't want to be judged based on color. We're going to have to do it. We're going to have to now take the lead. It's up to all of us to stop this insanity. I really believe that. Stay with us. We're joined by Senator Lankford, who just got back from the...
Dignity to the people.
So you work for the commissioner, your senior advisor. You were hired 2 weeks ago, and you're instructed to ask us to not have any pictures taken here.
Please respect the people,
because the political leadership at DHS does not want the American people to know it.
Please respect the rules,
You keep
sir.
standing in front of the pictures, so
Please
you don't want the
respect the
pictures
rules.
taken. The rules are arbitrary, and
Please
they're designed to keep
and
the American
give the people
in the dark.
dignity and respect. That's all we ask.
Well,
Dignity
no, it's
and
not.
respect.
You're asking, is this
Please-
dignity and respect? Look at
Please
these people.
give
There's
dignity
a
and
pandemic.
respect to the people.
Your reaction, that should not be happening.
Well, what you don't know from the rest of that is I was actually about 7 feet from Ted when he was actually shooting that video, because she had just confronted me right before then and said, I'm going to ask you to delete all the footage that you just took. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm a United States Senator. I'm not going to delete this footage. And she said, there's no footage allowed here. And I said, that's actually not true. I was in this exact same facility in 2019 when the Trump administration was here, and they allowed footage to here. They just asked us to not show the faces of children, which we completely respected, and I would not show their faces on those kids. But the American people could see it in 2019. They should be able to see it in 2021. The Biden team is trying to hide this from the American people, and I understand why, because it is so bad.
So President Biden, asked point blank about this, says he's not hiding it. It's all about COVID. I don't believe him, by the way, but here's a moment from last week's press conference when he was pressed on this matter.
Given the conditions that were just laid out at the migrant facilities at the U.S. border, will you commit to allowing journalists to have access to the facilities that are overcrowded moving forward?
I will commit when my plan very shortly is underway to let you have access to not just them, but to other facilities as well.
Just to be clear, how soon will that be, Mr. President?
I don't know, to be clear.
It's clear that he's trying to cover this up. What needs to be done? What can be done? Because they seem extremely stubborn right now, the Biden administration.
There are they. Release that out to a willing media, that a willing media will just show that video and say, oh, we don't need to send down a camera guy down there, we will just use the video the government's provided. And many networks have actually done that. We went on Thursday night to a bridge that's set up as a border crossing area and a check-in location for people that are illegally crossing the border. No cameras are allowed in this area. We took footage of that. I released that out as well. Literally, people are coming across the border, getting checked in, and 2 hours later, they're released in the country. They're told to be able to show up at a court hearing 3 years from now. And there's no way those individuals are going to show up. And it's unrealistic to be able to say, we'll do a hearing for you 3 years from now. You're welcome to be in the country for the next 3 years. That's the reality that's happening at the border. That's what Biden's team doesn't want anyone to see. That's what we want to make sure we saw for ourselves. And that we also allowed the American people to be able to see that video as well.
By the way, you snapped a picture. I believe this is a privately constructed fence. I want to show it to everybody and tell us what this is all about, please.
It's pretty remarkable. We were out with the Texas Department of Public Safety in their marine area on one of their boats, actually in the Rio Grande itself. And there's a whole area where there's a farmer got so upset with so many people illegally crossing into the country through his fields that he actually built that very large, very long private fence, put lights and cameras even up on it to say, if the government's not going to do a fence in this area, he was going to do his own. And so the fence construction is a big issue to the landowners that are in that area, that they don't want to see all this illegal crossing, so much so they're spending their own money. And I would tell you, in that same area, some of the new fence that President Trump was putting up, when President Biden stepped in and stopped all that construction, it is nonsensical. The gates are not finished. The cameras are not installed.
It's amazing. An open border, and they've got a majority in the Senate. You're highlighting the problem. You're doing what you can do. What's going to happen? I mean, this can't go on, or maybe it can.
The American people need to continue to speak out on this. And a lot of people have to say, hey, this is not why we have a border patrol so they can just invite people in, process them, and release them in the country. This is not why we have Customs and Border Protection, and we're trying to manage this. Literally, those individuals that are crossing the border, we know if they have an American criminal record, but we don't know any of them if they have a criminal record in their home country. And as I mentioned before, just in that one station area, they've had 56 different countries crossed this year.
When I saw what happened in New York City,
refrigerated trucks are now being mobilized as makeshift morgues.
Almost overrunning of our healthcare system. It was like, oh my goodness. And that's when it became very clear that the decision we made on January the 10th to go all out and develop a vaccine, we have a number of vaccine candidates, may have been the best decision that I've ever made with regard to an intervention as the director of the Institute.
The best decision that I've ever made. Did you catch that? Was this Dr. with him by his side throughout COVID? Look at that. That's, I think, when President Trump had to go to the hospital. There he is, Mark Meadows, Chief of Staff, and he joins us on Newsmax once again. Welcome back, Mr. Meadows. How are you?
It's great to be with you. Obviously, Dr. Fauci is trying to take credit for something that only Donald Trump could take credit for.
So, yes, I mean, that kind of leapt out. I was under the impression that he was skeptical about the vaccine from the earliest stages. And at times he did give Donald Trump credit. Does he think we forgot all those moments?
Well, apparently he forgot that last night when he was on another network to have this revisionist type history that has been rolled out. But I think the other fact is that Dr. Fauci very clearly continued to not only suggest that vaccines were going to be a long ways out, but in telling the president it could be a 3 to 5 year process. So, you know, we already have hundreds of millions of people that have gotten the vaccine because President Trump refused to listen to Dr. Fauci and pressed not only me, but many others in the administration to move forward. And to hear Dr. Fauci say it's the best decision he's ever made is extremely disingenuous.
What was he like to work with? We know he's a bit of a publicity hound, quite frankly, and he has said multiple things that turned out to be wrong, and he said them publicly, for instance, masks on 60 Minutes. What is he like behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, Dr. Fauci obviously has had a long, storied career with a number of different administrations, and as he's in the room, you can obviously see his interaction with other members. But I think than the Dr. Fauci that shows up on national media. He was off base a number of times as he discussed masks and vaccines, maybe as far off base as his opening pitch for the Nationals game. But when we see this, I can tell you that it is very troubling to have a history that I was in the room for, and obviously Dr. Fauci was in the room for, and yet to somehow suggest that the president shouldn't get credit for this vaccine. Even his own boss, Dr. Collins, suggested that it was President Trump's real reaction that made the difference.
So Dr. Birx, Deborah Birx, another member of the COVID task force, she summarized a conversation that she had with the president. I want to play this. This is a back and forth between her and Sanjay Gupta. Let's go ahead and play that, please.
Report in August that got horrible pushback. That was a very difficult time because everybody in the White House was upset with that interview and the clarity that I brought about the epidemic.
I can tell just by reading your face that was a really tough time. What happened?
Well, I got called by the president.
Were you threatened?
I would say it was a very uncomfortable conversation.
I'll talk about some leading questions there. I've got my own theories on Dr. Birx. Oh, she did get burned, let's face it, when she went to visit her family and the whole world found out about it. Like she's trying to somehow redeem herself inside the swamp. But Mark Meadows, you were there. What's your take on her and what she's saying now?
Well, Dr. Birx may recall a difficult conversation with President Trump, but it was more a conversation that was based on her leading into that particular interview without actually having the science to back it up. It was really more her comments about keeping schools closed and what was going to happen or not happen in rural America. It was her going not only off her own talking points, but off of her own advice. We know scientifically and from all the evidence we had at that particular point that schools were not the major cause of the spread of this virus, and yet she seemed to focus in on that. And so that was the pushback that she got. To suggest that it was anything more than that or that the president threatened her, I can tell you that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx gave advice to the president consistently, and at no time did he ever not take their advice. It was all about saving lives and making sure that he was able to not only get the virus under control, but making sure that vaccines and therapeutics got approved in the most expeditious manner possible.
Mark Meadows, you have a lot to be proud of. Chief of Staff to President Trump, joining us today from the Conservative Partnership Institute. We appreciate it. Come back soon, sir, please.
Thank you, Greg. Good to be with you.
All right, to be continued, and we'll be right back. Is that the fake news just doesn't get it, do they? They don't. All right, folks, I don't think 60 Minutes gets it. They were very easy on a guy. Well, it's not his fault, but I don't think he should be the district attorney for San Francisco, given his... And I don't think that's probably going to be the safest city with him as the prosecuting attorney. But it seems like he feels his parents were victimized somehow in all of this.
Learned from day one that our criminal justice system is not working. It is not keeping us safe. It is not investing in supporting victims of crime. It is not rehabilitating people, it's warehousing them. And in the process, it's bankrupting state and local governments, it's destroying communities and families, and it's contributing to an intergenerational cycle of incarceration.
And this is the perspective you got from seeing it up close firsthand.
That's right. I saw every day the people whose families were incarcerated and the impact it had on them. I was tremendously privileged in many ways as a white male, as someone who landed not in foster care, not being raised by a single grandmother, for example, but rather by a stable family.
Well, look, I'm glad he had a stable childhood. I have severe doubts with how he's running that office in San Francisco. We're going to talk about that later in the week. I could have used a little bit more attention on the victims. Peter Page, the security guard, Waverly Brown, and Edward O'Grady, the two officers killed. Yes, their parents did not pull the trigger. His parents did not pull the trigger, but they drove the getaway car. And we all know that you are just as guilty when you drive that getaway car as the person who pulled the trigger. That's how the law works. All right. Also, MSNBC has a big problem with Meghan McCain, daughter of the late senator. I'm not a big fan, quite frankly. I don't like her on The View. I find her kind of obnoxious, whatever. But even though she's not my cup of tea, she didn't deserve this from those vultures over there at MSNBC.
I'd like to have a quick conversation about identity politics and a princess called Meghan. Nope, not that Meghan. Ah, yes, this one, Meghan McCain. McCain, whose talent, as far as I can tell, is finding great black hairstylists and benefiting from nepotism, had this to say.
I don't know. She was making fun of the hairstyle. Was she hinting that it was cultural appropriation? That's a real hot button issue now. Look, I can give it out and I get it myself, but that was below the belt. It was just really, really mean. And that's what the left does. Sometimes it's just mean, no humor, no grace. Again, Meghan, I don't like. Grant Stinchfield show is coming up. You know what I mean? That's my policy. I love everybody as fellow human beings, but that doesn't mean I have to like them. Is there a logic to that? I hope so.
No, there's logic to that. I think those haircuts were absolutely ridiculous looking, but I'm not being mean. Just she does have some ridiculous looking haircuts.
Hey, Grant, at least she's got hair.
At least she has hair. Look at this, hurricane proof. In case they send me out to cover weather, I'm straight, man. I'm straight.
Grant, what's on the show tonight?
So we're going to kick off a big week, immigration series. Look, I know you're covering it, Greg. We've been covering it, but we're going to go really, really in deep now. We've got reporters on the border that are going to be reporting for us. We've got Mark Morgan coming up. You know, he used to head up Customs and Border Patrol. And then we've got a rancher also tonight who's going to talk about life on the border. And he's literally coming across illegals, coming across his land. It's a dangerous situation. So we're going to break it all down all week long, going really in depth on this whole immigration crisis. Greg.
All right, good stuff. How far is Dallas from the border? If you had to make it as fast as possible, how quickly could you get to Mexico?
Yeah, well, you know, it depends on where along the border you're going, but I would say maybe 5 hours. You could get down to the border. That if you go real far west, you know, it could take you 10, 12 hours to get down there where it's getting really, really rough. It's look, Texas, as you know, it's a huge state, but we already have these illegals here being housed in Dallas, so we're feeling its effects.
Amazing. Big Texas. Yeah, 10 hours, you're still in Texas. I could drive 10 hours. I'll be in South Carolina. It's interesting.
It's qualified immunity, which I know is close to your heart and mine. Qualified immunity protects government officials from civil liability. Also, discipline of officers has now been handled by the Civilian Complaint Review Board instead of the police commissioner. Mayor de Blasio pushed back and said that officers would still not be personally liable, but rather this would make it easier for the New York Police Department and the city to be sued. However, Police Commissioner Dermot Shea and PBA President Pat Lynch, who don't always agree, pushed back on that sentiment by de Blasio. Lynch, who represents over 24,000 members of the New York Police Department, said that members of the police are on the street day and night trying to stop bloodshed while the city council are safe at home hiding. Now, it makes you wonder, Greg, in a city where in 2020 you had more shooting victims than in 2019 and 2018 combined, if this is the kind of police reform that New York City needs.
No, Andrew. And we got a bunch of lunatics on that city council. It's too bad. And heck, we miss your dad.